corner of the property, known as 362 County Road 607, Athens, Tennessee. An overview of it is that there are 9.5 acres that run along this county road. Runs back to that tree line right there. Down beyond that barn you can see in the distance. And at this corner it turns and it runs down this road. The entire thing is viewed here. You can see the hill in the distance. Up most of the way up that hill with the woods is the extreme end of it from this end. This pasture represents part of the approximately 5 acres of pasture that's on this 9.5 acres. And from here you can also see some of the trees, the flowering trees, the garden area, garden shed, the house. You can make out part of the guest house. This section of this little mini farm here is fully fenced. It has the board fence that encloses the garden area. You can see the garden shed here at the back of the garden, which is surrounded by young fruit trees. The garden shed was an old house that was deconstructed and reconstructed here, a cabin-like place that was built in the 1870s according to the 100-year-old gentleman that had me take it apart. And from here you can see the house. This property has a culvert that starts here and runs about 200 feet, empties on the other side of the lower driveway, of which there are two. There's a paved driveway that goes to the upper carport. There's a paved driveway that goes to the lower carport. This house has a full basement underneath, which is fully finished except for approximately 1/4 of it, which we use for storage, canned goods, and mechanical instruments for the house. This 200 feet, approximately 150 to 200 feet of culvert that runs up front of the property makes it a lot easier to mow it and keep it looking better. This culvert empties here and it runs down this area and it dumps into the creek. Before we moved here, there was a man who had a club that met in a very large canopied area. We call it a pavilion, and it is. It's actually more of a park size. It's 50 feet long and 30 feet wide, and behind that is a seasonal restroom. It's fully plumbed, but we do not use it in the winter time because it's not heated. This part of the property is really more like a park than it is a small farm. It has an all-weather creek running through it. It never runs dry. It never even gets close to running dry in the nearly 6 years we've lived here, including 2 years that were considered drought years. You can see the porch swing that's hung on aluminum poles right next to the creek before you get to the bridge that crosses the creek. This creek splits this property. It does not flank the property. There are approximately 600 feet of this creek that runs more or less through the middle of it because a good bit of the property is on the other side of the creek, and it runs up this large hill here that is covered mostly with hardwoods. A couple of pine trees in there and a few cedars, but mostly it's hickory and oak. Here's the lower piece of pasture. It's not fenced. We take hay from these pastures. Another view of the seasonal restroom, another view of the large canopy. And this is also a view of the house from the lower side. And also, you can see the house that has been built. It could be used as a guest house or a mother-in-law house. It's approximately 570 square feet. It's fully finished, and I also built it where it could be conveniently attached to the main house if anyone should ever desire to do that. Currently, there is about a 20-foot area between there that is mostly open, with a good long, slow sloping ramp to accommodate an older person. The barn it's approximately about 30. It has 4 main areas, one of which is a shop, And there's a center stall that you drive through. It can be driven through. That's with the high part of the roof. The next one is where we keep various things just stored, and the hay is in the lowest part of the barn. Call it, well, the hay shed area. Here's the area of this small farm that certainly seems park-like to us. I've caught bass and perch from this creek, even though I understand that the main fish are bluegill. And this is a view of the far corner of the property. If you can follow that tree line, and then it goes up the hill back there. This is a view, upper view of the lower piece of pasture, which is about an acre. View up the hill, which is somewhat toward town, and a panoramic view that you have from here. We do live in what's called a subdivision. It has been restricted. Mobile homes are not allowed, and unrunning, unused cars are not allowed. This is a view of the creek from the road. It is approximately 90 feet in front of the house. This is the road end of the approximately 600 feet of this creek that runs through the property. There are 3 springs on the property. 2 of the springs empty into the creek on this property. The other spring runs parallel with this creek for a while before it empties into this creek on another property. This is a meadow area that lies between the creek and this hill, which you can get a much better view of here than probably you've seen yet, covered with hardwoods. Quite beautiful. You can see the first spring that's closest to the road there. When you see that gash in the ground, that is one of the springs. The 3 springs also run year-round, have never run dry. The spring that you have in your view here now is one that was used for water source for a local small school that went out of business decades ago, but the water is that pure. The spring closest to the road exits this big hill right here, and as you can see, it runs a small brook under this cover and into the creek there. Another feature close to the creek that makes it somewhat park-like is this swing set that was erected. These aluminum poles seem to be rot-proof forever. This is where the first spring enters a creek. You can almost make out a kind of a little delta there that it's created as it's run through the ages. There's one bridge across the creek. It's this bridge here. Very steady. I drive the lawnmower across that. Third spring, which is farthest from the road, empties onto our property from this same hill, somewhat back into those trees, and runs in that direction until it runs off our property back there where you can see it, another tree line. This is a view from the bridge that crosses the creek that you've seen several angles of. This is a view from the bridge running away from the road back towards other properties that are behind us. The bridge, and this is the view of the creek running back toward the road. The third spring is here. It empties from the hill on the other side of the creek, and it empties into the creek there. Possibly make out the red, and it's hard to know with the sunshine, but this is a red maple here, or a box elder here. Perhaps you can make out these peach trees, a couple of small ones around the garden, right, those 2 right there, larger ones up next to the house. The large trees in the front yard are maple trees, sugar maples, and you can see the red bud in between those. There's other red buds down the hill, down toward the creek. And there are a couple of redbuds in the back. A better view of the small peach trees and the large peach trees, the red maple behind, the box elder in the middle, the garden shed at the end of the garden. You've already seen the two small peach trees at the other end. Here we have a couple of apples, and I forgot to mention that there are two apricot trees out there. These trees are young, haven't started to bear, but we have a lot of hope for them. Along this line of plantings here, we have 20 blueberry bushes. They have started to bear. The tree that fills the screen now is a crepe myrtle tree. Blooms beautifully later in the year. This is called a snowball. It has white flowers on it. You can see one of the red buds in the front yard here in the middle of the four large maple trees. Another snowball is here, a planting called a snowball. You can see some of the red buds in the background that are spaced between the pear trees. And this is, I think they call this a japonica or a wild crab apple or a quince or something here. It's got pretty kind of coral colored flowers on it. A large holly bush here, handy for getting berries and holly for Christmas decorations if you want those. The Bradford pears in this line of trees here that line the lower driveway have already quit blooming, but you can see the red buds that are blooming. Most of the trees that you see beginning to leaf out along the creek on this side are black walnut trees. The black walnuts have been abundant every year that we've lived here. You can see another one of the many redbud trees that's on the property in this view. You can see small trees here and larger trees. Most of the trees that are sticking out on their own in this meadow, including these two small ones here, are black walnut trees. They're not near as mature as you can see as most of the other black walnuts along the creek. Among the vegetation that grows on this farm is the watercress that grows in the spring. And there is a close-up picture of the watercress for any of you health-conscious people who know what watercress is. It is tart and delicious. This is the downhill view of the four large sugar maples that are in the front yard. The tree in front of the barn is a pecan tree. There's a red bud in the backyard of this property, and the canopy is over 30 feet wide. We understand that's about the limit for a red bud tree, so it must be pretty old. In the lower yard here, we have the cherry trees, pear trees, and plum trees. The fruit trees around the garden are apple trees and peach trees. The large tree framed in the background of this scene is another sugar maple. Not as old as the ones in the front, but it's never had to be trimmed and sure has a beautiful shape out there going by itself. The plantings around the house are of various kinds. There's forsythia and some privet, and you can see these holly bushes in the front. Behind the smaller house, there are 5 apple trees, and you can also see the small cedar that was planted not too long ago. The house is approximately 2,200 square feet. That does include the full basement. The house does come with a freestanding stove in the basement that comes through this chimney here, or the exhaust does. It heats the entire house, even in extremely cold weather. In the back of the carport is the laundry room. It must be accessed by going into the carport. All of the utilities on this property are buried. There is electricity that runs from the house to the barn. The electricity for the house behind runs from this box here the second one to the right, there are 200 amps that run to that smaller house. From there, we have fed the barn with electricity from the 200 amp panel that we use in our house. Nothing is taken off except to run the main house. From the other 200 amp panel that feeds the smaller house out back, we have also run underground electricity, water, and hard line phone lines to this shed. This house is heated and cooled with a mini split unit. It works quite well with this open floor plan. The main house is heated with an electric heat pump and electric air conditioning. The well water that provides the water for this farm here apparently is never ending. It's been run all day, more than one time. Never clouded, it never is cloudy, and it's never shown the least signs of running out. The wishing well, which is situated in the side yard next to the upper driveway, is the actual well. The well head is inside that structure there. Someone before we moved in had the idea of putting a wishing well above the real well. The water is delicious and abundant.